a presentation. It's a little combination of tips and execution. It's basically just it's an entry level presentation for becoming a landlord. So, what I identified pretty early on is that this is like sometimes people get into this and they kind of learn as they go. I did. So what I'm hoping to do is just share some of my experience. Carmelo, maybe you can share some of your experience as well. We can just talk about some best practices. I mean, like nothing here is, should be considered legal advice. If you're actually facing a situation with a tenant, you may want to reach out to a paralegal or to a lawyer, depending on what the options are wherever you live. But yeah, do your own due diligence. I mean, this presentation is just basically solely based on my own experience. I've been in this business of owning properties for about 10 years. I own properties in Ontario that I self-manage. I have properties in Alberta that I have a management company for. So kind of a little bit of both. Recently, I also got into the short-term rental business. So I converted one of my long-term rental properties into an Airbnb, and we do a different presentation about that as well, where I talk about kind of how I got into that, how much it costs to convert the property, and kind of what my experience has been like so far. A little bit about myself. My name is Zhvanetskiy. I'm a realtor of Remax Condos Plus in Toronto. I spent over a decade in Toronto's condominium industry before getting into the real estate business. I was in an executive role. I was the vice president of a service provider company. We provided services exclusively to Toronto condos, so that's where a lot of my expertise lies. I've conducted over 65 condominium assessments during my time. I've also been a real estate investor since 2013, as I mentioned, and in 2022, I was in the top 1% for GTA condo sales, 70,000 agents. And if anybody wants to connect on social, you can scan that QR code there and get my link tree. So who's going to benefit from this presentation? I wanted to have this slide first because I want to kind of make sure that if this presentation is not the right fit for you, I wanted to save you some time. So this presentation is for newer landlords. It's for those who are maybe thinking about purchasing a property and they're either thinking about self-managing that property, or maybe they want to purchase a property and kind of do a hybrid where they self-manage, but they also get some professional services, or even if they just want to hire a management company that you will pay a fee to. Usually that fee is between 5 and 10% of the monthly rent, and they will just kind of manage everything for you and just reach out to you when maybe there's a repair that's needed. And that's a different experience. It's a lot more hands-off. Being a landlord, I mean, you're basically getting into a customer service role. The person who's renting the property from you is your customer. This is a good mindset to go into it because, in the media, we hear a lot of really negative publications. I mean, nobody's going to go on the news and, do a news report on how 99.9% of tenants paid the rent on time this month and they're great tenants to have. Like, you're only going to hear about those really bad cases that kind of scare everybody. And this is what I see also as a real estate agent when I'm working. Part of my business is not just on resale, but also on helping tenants lease property. So like I've seen this myself too, where landlords are just like really scrutinizing very, very heavily. It's like they're basically asking for everything except for a blood sample from these people in order to consider them. So I think that the media has a lot to do with that, but it's also because our tribunal system here on the landlord tenant board in Ontario, I think there's a significant backlog of cases right now, maybe 50 or 60,000 cases. It takes 8 to 10 months to get a hearing. If you find a bad tenant and then they don't want to move out of the property and they stop paying you rent, you could be covering that rent out of pocket for up to a year, and then they can also potentially cause damage to your property, and then your only recourse could be to take into small claims court, but you can't really get water from a stone. Like, if they have nothing, then it's going to be very challenging. So one thing that I do hear a lot when I talk to landlords about challenges they've had with tenants is that quite often there are these red flags that come up, these indications that come up. A lot of it is through the pre-screening process, and it's little clues that you can kind of pick up on. It's it's things that are a little bit difficult to identify unless you're having a face-to-face conversation with a tenant. And these are things you pick up in body language and things that you pick up over time in the way that they answer questions. I mean, it's a little bit different for me because I come from a background that was, I serviced condominiums, but I basically worked in security and risk management for 20 years. And a big chunk of that was doing interviews with people. Like the last 10 years, it's pretty much the people business. So just through doing interviews, I kind of picked up on these things. It's not something everybody's going to pick up on. So, there are options for those people that are looking to use a real estate agent to pre-screen and find them a tenant. That is a service that's available as well. But it's definitely not necessary. I mean, you can just advertise yourself and pre-screen them yourself. But the topics that we're going to be covering in this presentation are these. So we're going to talk about recruitment and selection of quality tenants. So where do you find quality? Managing the property and the tenant and their expectation and providing service to them. Like I mentioned a few minutes ago, this is pretty much a client service role. Also going to talk about not so much knowing your rights, but knowing where to find your rights and when to use third-party professionals. Like I have to be very careful as a real estate agent. I can't give anything that may seem like I'm giving you legal advice because I'm not going to be covered for that. My insurance doesn't cover me to give people legal advice for tenant issues. I'm going to talk about some common practices to navigate things like rent increases and what to do when a tenant moves out. And just also, again, just talk about the third-party experts that are available. So these are resources that are available for most people, except for the MLS Realtor one, in order to find tenants. So, you can post ads on Facebook Marketplace. Before I was a real estate agent, Facebook Marketplace worked pretty well for me. And I actually still kind of continue to utilize Facebook Marketplace to offset the other channel that's available to me. And that's, of course, the MLS, which is the multiple listing service. As a real estate agent, when I post a rental, I can post it onto the MLS. The MLS is where you get listings that go to websites like House Sigma, condos.ca, realtor.ca. Other realtors see them. Realtors that are working with clients to find a rental do the search on the MLS. And, you do find a higher caliber tenant pool this way, but there is a fee to use a realtor. So if you wanted to use a real estate agent to lease out your property, in Ontario, the fee is 1 month rent plus HST, and that's split between the two brokerages. So half of that goes to your brokerage where your realtor works, and the other half goes to the brokerage of the real estate agent that's going to bring you the qualified tenant. But yeah, other online resources available for free like Craigslist, Kijiji. These work well. Putting signs in the lobby, like if it's a condominium and they permit that, you may want to do this because residents quite often may know somebody that's looking to move into the building. I've also come across properties that we advertise on the MLS, and then we also put a sign in the lobby, and we end up finding the tenant through that lobby sign and not through the MLS because the tenant is actually needing to move out of their current unit and they want to stay in the same unit in the same building because of where their kids go to school or they just like the area. When you're pre-screening a tenant, I would treat it as an interview and, kind of ask questions that are a little bit open-ended questions. So just, maybe having them talk a lot more than you is something that I recommend. Like, you can just ask them like a question, like, just tell me a bit about yourself. Why do you want to rent this unit? Tell me about your household. What do you do for work? And what you'll find is that a lot of times they'll divulge this information, especially if you're maybe somebody who's not really comfortable asking people, what's your credit score? What do you do for work? What's your annual income? Is your credit score low because it's new credit, or is it because you have delinquencies in paying bills? These are not comfortable questions for everybody to have, and not comfortable conversations for everybody to have. I have them on a daily basis, so it may just kind of like roll off, but kind of just opening it up and letting people talk. A lot of times they know what you want to hear, and they'll kind of take you on that path yourself, and also open it up for you to ask follow-up. So, for example, what do you do for work? This maybe also give you an opportunity to ask if they work from home or if they work remotely. Are they going to be, using your property for that purpose? Do they have pets? Especially for condos, this is really important because condos have pet restrictions and pet rules. Like every condo has some sort of rules around pets. Kavita, after this presentation is completed, you will have an opportunity to ask questions. And also I'm going to be sharing this presentation on YouTube, so you can check it out there. But yeah, so amazing. You're welcome. Okay, so yeah, asking if they own pets, if it's a condo, you want to make sure that that type of pet is permitted in the condo. I've heard really bad situations happen before where somebody didn't kind of do this research. They rented a condo, and then when they show up to start moving in, all of a sudden security tells them it's a pet-free building, and now they're scrambling trying to figure out what they're going to be doing with their pet. What's their move-in date? That's a good question to ask as well. If somebody's looking for a unit to move into like yesterday, that's an indication of, at least something to ask a little bit more questions about, like, what's the situation around that? Why is it that they're looking so quickly? And also asking about their credit, just like make sure that everything makes sense to you. Like that's kind of what it is at the end of the day. Like things should align and make sense. After you ask these questions, you should not have more questions. If you have more questions, or if the answers are inconsistent, this can be an opportunity for you to kind of go deeper into it. These are the documents that I request as a real estate agent when I'm pre-screening tenants for my own properties or for my clients' properties. So you want to make sure that you have a rental application. If you want a copy of the Form 410, so it's a standard Ontario rental application that can be used for any property, you can reach out to me. I can send you an editable PDF of that, so that you can send it to prospective tenants. And the rental application basically just like, has sections where they fill out information about themselves, what do they do for work, how many occupants, they have pets, why they're moving, last places where they've lived. One thing is like when, and I'm going a little bit in all directions here, but one thing is that when a tenant provides you a landlord's contact information, like their current landlord's contact information, I wouldn't really even bother contacting that landlord. What I'm going to ask is I'm going to ask for their past landlord information, like where they don't live already. Because if this is a nightmare tenant and the current landlord wants to get them out, and you reach out for a reference, like they're going to tell you this is the best tenant ever, because they just want to get them off their property and into somebody else's. So that's something to do. I mean, as a real estate agent, I also have access to the land registry database, so I can actually verify if the landlord who they're providing in fact owns that unit. Kevin likes this. Yeah, so I can actually verify if like the landlord actually owns that unit. Employment letter and pay stubs, that's something you want to get as well. I would also research the company online. I've had cases where fake employment letters were provided, and then after some research, we were able to identify that this was fraudulent. The person, like they like the company had a website, they had a 1-800 number. If you call that number, there's an automated answering service. But the reason that I was able to find this is that when I did some background checks on the person who wrote the letter, I found that they were the only person employed in this company. And then when I did a reverse Google image search on the person's LinkedIn profile, I found that this was an artificially, like an AI generated generic picture of a man. 2. Not 1, but 2. So version 2. So this is how we're able to find that this was fraudulent. We want a copy of the government IDs, credit report. Right now, you can get a free credit report through Equifax, because this is a digital document and people can use Photoshop to alter it. Another service that I offer my clients is that I do my own credit check through my brokerage. So we get their credit report. Once we accept the tenant, I have a due diligence period in the offer. So it's usually 1 or 2 business days after acceptance for me to verify employment. And during that period, I will also send my brokerage their ID and their rental application, and they do the credit report through that. So then I can verify that, in fact, their credit report is legitimate. Yeah, and also make sure that you get these documents from everybody that's going to be residing in the home. Because one thing that I sometimes find, like there's like 3 adults that want to share a property, for example, as roommates, but they want to only put 1 person on the lease. So that's a red flag for me. Like, why do these other 2 people not want to go on the lease? Would this not automatically strengthen their application that you have 3 people making income as opposed to 1? That's the way that I would approach it. So that just doesn't make sense for me. So I would not want that. Like if you're an adult residing in the unit, you should have to provide your credit report. Even if you just came to Canada, your credit score is 0. I still want to see it. Even if you're a student, I want to see like a letter of employment. I want to verify and I want to know who are the people that are going to be residing in this unit and what their story is all about. Because I have encountered this before, and I've heard stories where, let's say there's a couple and they reside together. Well, one of the partners takes on all the bad debt and the other one pays all their bills on time. So that way, what happens is like one person has a credit score in the mid 700s, and the other one is the one that's taking on these bills and having a hard time paying them, and their credit score is lousy, and they have all this consumer debt on their report. So this is something I want to avoid. So because of that, I want all these documents. And usually what I do is to not waste my time before I show somebody a unit or before I have them come and check out, let's say like my home that I want to rent out. I'm going to tell them like, these are all the documents I need. Give me your email address. I'm going to send it to them so that they have it. And I also set out the expectation for them. So I tell them like, hey, I'm looking for tenants to make, this much a year. I'm looking for tenants to have a credit score above this much. I'm looking for tenants that, I don't know, like this is how many people are going to reside in the household. I don't want to have like 5 roommates. I'm looking for single family tenants. So by having that discussion up front and then telling them, okay, let me send you everything, you can review it and let me know if that's okay, I'm saving myself time because I don't want to go show them the property and then they say, oh yeah, like I don't want to provide my credit report, or I work for cash, I can't confirm how much I earn, and all of this. So by having these conversations up front, I'm just initially like literally saving myself time. And when you're doing your background check on the tenant, I recommend not actually focusing on the tenant, but I would recommend focusing on their employer, finding out, does the person who's listed as their employment reference actually work for the company? I would also not call that person. I would reach, because I don't know who I'm talking to. Like they can say that they're John Smith, vice president of sales at ABC company, but who knows? Like, especially if I have a cell phone number to call, I might be talking to their cousin. Like it's, I have no way to verify this. So I would just call the company directly. I would Google the company. I would find their phone number online, and I would just call and I would ask to speak to human resources. And I would just call and say, I'm doing a verification of employment for this person. And this is like something that works a lot better for me. Google is your friend, Instagram is your friend, Facebook, LinkedIn. Do research on these tenants. If let's say maybe you have a pet allergy and you're renting out a furnished unit, you don't want to have tenants with pets, because even if you clean the unit after they move out, you're still going to have an allergic reaction. Like you're not going to be able to live there again. So, if they say that they have no pets and then I go onto their Instagram and it's them with their dog, those are red flags. Like I mentioned before, don't just call the most recent landlord. Like just make sure that everything makes sense, like that your spidey sense is not tingling. Because if it's tingling, then you can just kind of like it's asking more and more questions, and then when you have doubts about the tenant, sometimes it's just not good even if like to just move forward with that application at all. I've also started to encounter this and encounter this regularly, that tenants want to use a guarantor. So this happens quite often. Like maybe you have a condo near University of Toronto that you're renting out, and the child that wants to live there doesn't have any income, like they're a university student. So how do you get a guarantor on there? So first of all, find out who is the guarantor. Like what is their relation to this person? Ideally, it should be a parent. Pre-screen them as if they're a tenant. So get their employment letters, their pay stubs, get their credit report, look at their credit report, see what is their credit, like and not just their credit score, but also like, are they paying their bills on time? How much consumer debt do they have? Because if they experience some hardship themselves, how can they assure they're going to be getting paid your rent on time? Like if they, let's say, for example, are living, like maybe they're making lots of money, but living paycheck to paycheck and have lots of credit card debt. And then what happens if their company lays them off? How are they going to pay your rent and also pay their own bills? So, that's something that comes up. I mean, I've encountered a lot that, in Toronto, landlords, if it's a university student, they want the full year rent up front. That's become like almost a standard practice. Unfortunately, it's very not fair. It sucks, but this is kind of what some landlords do. I never recommend that, by the way. Like, I never recommend taking a full year rent up front or any rent up front, except for first and last. First of all, you can't request that. They have to voluntarily offer that to you. But I wouldn't use that as a substitute for a tenant that you otherwise wouldn't consider, because, after a year and the lease is over, in Ontario, the lease is not over. The tenancy goes month to month. So you're still stuck with this tenant, even if they sign a 1-year lease. So they pay a year up front. What happens after the year? So, but if they are going to be using a guarantor, what I would recommend is that the guarantor goes on the lease as an additional tenant. They would sign the lease as if they're a tenant. I mean, you can put in brackets as guarantor or something like that, but they should be responsible for it as if they're a tenant living there. Tenants' rights. So one of the reasons why landlords are very picky, particularly when they're finding tenants, is that tenants have lots of rights in Ontario. I talked about how the landlord-tenant tribunal is backlogged. It's taking months up to years sometimes to get hearings. So, there's a lot of great resources available to you, like the Residential Tenancies Act. It's available online for you to see. There's examples that they give in there about scenarios that might happen that are very kind of real, like things that you may encounter as a landlord. Make sure that you have access to this. You have access to review this, because the Residential Tenancies Act, it supersedes everything. So even if you have a schedule with your lease that, outlines, some specific terms, if these terms are not permitted under the Residential Tenancies Act, they're void and not valid. For example, not providing 24 hours notice. If in your lease it says that you can come and inspect the unit without notice, you still have to provide 24 hours notice. It's not permitted for you to just go and inspect that unit without notice. There's a lot of great resources online. There's forms that you can use. The Ontario Standard Leases online, or the Residential Tenancies Agreement, as it's now called. There's documents that are available for you. If you need to increase rent, there's a specific form you need to use. If a tenant didn't pay their rent, there's a specific form you need to use to let them know that they need to pay their rent, or you're going to evict them. If the tenant's moving out, there's a form they're supposed to use. So, you can get these confirmations by email from them. Like, you can just take an email or a text message as like, hey, I'm moving out March 31st. Well, let's say you find a new tenant for April 1st, and this tenant that's moving out March 31st all of a sudden decided that they can't find a place and they're going to be staying. If you don't have an N11 signed, you don't have something that's enforceable in the tribunal. So you can find yourself in a very difficult situation if that tenant, let's say maybe they thought they're going to move in with their girlfriend. Now they broke up, the tenant has nowhere to go. They're telling you they're continuing the place, and you've already signed a lease with a new tenant. So without an N11, you're going to have to potentially go through months and months of trying to get this tenant out. And it's a kind of like good luck proving it, because if they continue to pay their rent, then I don't know if you can actually do anything like that. Again, I'm not a paralegal or a lawyer, and that's why I have that here as a third bullet point. So make sure that you have access to a paralegal or a lawyer. You have somebody that you can call to ask questions, or to help you if there is some sort of difficult proceeding, because you don't want to be kind of guessing or figuring it out, especially if this is a process you've never been through before. The Ontario Standard Lease is a great document and resource for you to use. As a landlord, you're required to provide your tenant a lease. If your tenant requests a copy of the lease and you don't provide it, they can actually withhold rent for a month until you provide that lease to them. Basically the lease is great at spelling out who's responsible for what is the landlord responsible for, what is the tenant responsible for, what utilities they're going to be paying for, who's going to shovel the driveway, who's going to mow the lawn, what's their responsibilities for minor repairs. I would spell everything out either in the lease or in the schedule to the lease, because when I'm getting tenants, I want to spell it out to them. If you need to change a light bulb, that's on you. I'm not going to drive there to change, because I've had situations like this before, where a tenant reached out to the landlord, said, oh, the kitchen light's burned out. The landlord drove there, changed the kitchen light, and guess what? Now today's favor is tomorrow's duty. So every time something like that happens, that landlord is going to be now expected to do it because they did it once. So, spell everything out. You're allowed to take a key deposit. The key deposit has to be reasonable, so it should be in line with what the cost is to rekey that unit if the keys are not returned. Make sure that you set out any special rules like parking, the tenant will park their car to the east, on the east end of the driveway. Who's going to change the air filter in the furnace. all of this, like it should be spelled out in your lease. If you're having, if you're going to be looking to rent out your property, you're not sure how to address this or how to break this down, feel free to reach out to me. Carmel is going to share a link at the end. You can book a call with me or you can connect with me on Instagram. My Instagram is your.torontoagent, but you can also message me through Meetup. So like if you're in the process of renting out your property, but you're not sure, our goal here in this community is to continuously add and build value. So like no obligations. Like if you don't use me to rent your property, that's fine. Like it doesn't matter for me. I just want to provide this information to you. So it's like reach out, ask the questions. Where I can, I'll answer. If I can't answer, I'll tell you, go talk to a third-party professional. But we want to be a resource for you. Annual rent increase and rent control. So for those who may not be aware of this, in 2018. The Ford government got rid of rent control for everything moving forward. So basically any property that, like any condo, for example, property that was first occupied for residential purposes before November 15th, 2018, rent control applies. Anything after that, rent control doesn't apply. So what this means is that for units that have rent control, the government sets out what the maximum amount of rent increase can be for those units. The last 2 years or 3 years has been like 2.5%. Which is actually below inflation. But there are ways that you can increase it above that, but you need to get a special exemption from the Residential Tenancies Board for that. Like you have to prove like how your expenses went up for this property. And I believe your mortgage going up is not a valid expense. It's like more like something like you did a major improvement or something like that to the structure or the condo or whatever. So so make sure where rent control applies or where it doesn't apply. If you have a newer condo, for example, or a newer home that was built after November 15th, 2018, you can literally increase your rent whatever you want. But there is also what's called a bad faith eviction. So if you're increasing your rent by an unreasonable amount with the intention of getting your tenant out so you can put your property for sale, that is a bad faith eviction. You may have to compensate your tenant for that if they take you to court. So just make sure that, of course, if you're going to be doing that to sell your property, you're going to be talking to your realtor. So make sure you talk to your realtor about that and doing that properly. And as much as possible, like us realtors, we have insurance for these things. So use us as your resource for this. Like if we're, they're working as if you're their client and they're going to be selling your property and you want them to go through the process of getting that tenant out, for example, so that you can sell the property vacant, have your realtor do that and engage them because we're insured for this. So some of the notices that are available to you on the Landlord Tenant Board website is, for example, this one. This is a notice of rent increase. So, you can give your tenant a notice of a rent increase by sending them an email or a text message, but there is an appropriate form they're supposed to use that would actually be held up in the tribunal. These forms are free for you to download. So just, use these forms for everything. And some final moving tips for the tenants, like when the tenant moves in. So I always recommend doing a pre-inspection of the unit with the tenants. You document any deficiencies, you take pictures, videos, maybe have a form where you fill it out, test all the appliances, put like all appliances in good working order, tested with tenant, John Smith present, gave him 2 door keys, 2 building fobs, 1 garage remote, 1 mailbox key. Like maybe take a picture of the keys, receive $300 key deposit. Document everything. Have them confirm and sign off on this, right? That this is the condition that the unit was in when they moved in. Get a copy of their tenant insurance beforehand. $1 million minimum. I recommend $2 million. $1 million, unfortunately, does not go as far now after COVID as it once did. So $2 million liability, I recommend that. Key deposit should also be provided before the tenancy. Post-dated checks, I don't really recommend them. Like they're not legal to request, but if you want to get post-dated checks from your tenant, then you can ask that. The tenant can refuse. So be prepared for that. Again, that's something that I would have a conversation with them long beforehand, like before probably even showing them the unit. Like maybe after you kind of pre-qualify them on the phone as somebody you would consider as a tenant, tell them like, hey, I prefer post-dated checks, and see what they say. And if they start to give you pushback on that, then maybe you have to kind of see, is this something that, because it can be valid. Like, what is the validity of a post-dated check? I mean, I guess unless just like only if your rent is above the daily e-transfer limit. that may be the only thing. So there might be ways to increase that. And yeah, also prepaid rent above the Residential Tenancies Act guidelines is not legal to request. So like your mortgage goes up, your mortgage doubles. You go to your tenant and you say, you know, I gotta sell, or sorry, I need you to, come up on the rent significantly here. They can say no. You can find yourself in a difficult situation. There's other ways to kind of, have that conversation. Like maybe your tenant's already preparing to move out. So, telling them something like, hey, I understand that, I'm not telling you have to move out, but in the event that you were planning to move out, maybe, I can give you some financial assistance to move out and you can do it sooner. You never know. It's just kind of having those conversations and having good communication with your tenant, because at the end of the day, they are your client. Some forms that are available for you on the Landlord Tenant Board website. So there's basically everything here that you can see and more, from notice to end your tenancy for non-payment of rent, to agreement to end tenancy, to kind of everything in between. And some final tips, like I mentioned so many times throughout this presentation, is maintain a good relationship with your tenants. I recommend picking your battles as well with them. So, there's things that you maybe want to give pushback on, but, something small, I would kind of, some things may not be worth affecting the relationship at the end of the day. Because like when they're in your unit, unfortunately, they have a lot more powers than you as the landlord. So, like, is it worth it? Think about that. Today's favor also becomes tomorrow's duty. So that's something too, right? Like if you start to do something and then you take it away, you're gonna be the bad guy that's taking it away. But if you never did it in the first place, you're just following the rules and policies, and always kind of turn to process, right? So like if it's an uncomfortable thing for you to say to them, I recommend always just telling them the process. Like, I spoke to my realtor and this is what my realtor recommended, or I spoke to my to this, or I did this research and this is the best practices. It's always best practices. It's never personal or your emotions or anything like that. At the end of the day, it's a business. I also recommend you inspect your unit every 6 months. Also, make sure that you get landlord insurance. We have a great resource for that. Basil, who's come on and done webinars with us before about home insurance products. We're going to be looking forward to having him come back probably in a couple of months. But yeah, make sure you switch over your insurance to a landlord policy. You let your insurer know that you have a tenant living in the unit. And yeah, like rent control and rent increases. So make sure that you're on that. And I do recommend increasing the rent every single year, even if it's like a rent controlled building, because these 2.5%, they add up, and your maintenance fees go up every year, most likely, if it's a condo, or just your costs of carrying that property go up. So it adds up. So yeah, this is my presentation or long diatribe about being a landlord. So I'm just going to open it up to some questions. I don't know, Kavita, if you had